Hello everyone, this is Lisbeth Stahl Cottage Caboodle, and I'm here today to show you how I do a snowflake background. Today I'll be using two of my stencils. I have three total snowflake stencils for you to use, and these are the latest two, the large snowflake and the small snowflake. So there's one that's mixed, there's a large, and then there's a small. So I'm going to be using the large and the small today. So I guess I will change my camera and go down. So here you can see my stencils. This is the small one, of course, and this is the large one. I've prepped my board. This is a birch plywood board with periwinkle and Deco Art multi-purpose sealer. So periwinkle is also a Deco Art Americana color. I love the colors that are a little bit purple when I'm painting snow. So there you have it. That's why. So this is a background that I use a lot. I'm using it on a new project, the Believe Snow Globe Snowy, but I've also used it on several others. So you can really use anything that you have, a favorite blue that you have, or paints that you have, or for that matter, any snowflake stencil. I'm never going to tell you that you have to buy mine. This is the large one, and that's where I'm going to start out. I'm not going to think about all of the places where my character or where my other stuff will be. I really want to just get on some random snowflakes. So I'm going to start with putting out my color. I just put out a little at a time. Right now it's a little bit warm here, so things tend to dry out quickly. I'm going to use Provence Sky, which is another, both of these are new colors from Deco Art. I'm going to put a little more vivid blue out. Sometimes when we're using a stencil brush, it takes up a little more paint. I want a little bit of turquoise. And you're probably thinking, oh my goodness, those are not snow colors in my book. Well, you know, I'm kind of crazy that way. I like to have a lot of color in there. And I also want my color to disappear and reappear. So, I forgot to paint, sorry. So I want it to be, you know, changing and kind of flowing and not too hung up on anything that is, I don't know, that too stringent. You don't have to worry about my colors. Just choose some that you like, and it will, and as long as they look good together, they're going to be just fine. So then I've got winter blue. And when you're selecting, say you're selecting some other colors, turn your bottles upside down and see how you want a little bit of difference, but you want them also to be, oops, that's the wrong one, somewhat harmonious. So those are the colors that I have out, but I'm going to add a little bit of bright blue. And you know, there's other colors that are close. So the bottom line is, if you like it, it's perfect. So if you don't have bright blue though, ocean blue, sapphire, a lot of those blues will work just fine. I'm going to be using a stencil brush today, and sometimes I'll use a sponge. A makeup sponge is what a lot of people use. I particularly like these stencil brushes. These are Lori Speltz's stencil brushes, available on her website. And I just like them because if you can see, they're kind of rounded and trimmed. So they really are nice for stenciling. So when I load my stencil brush, I'm going to get it into the paint, and you can see it's really loaded and shiny and stuff. I would never, ever, ever go to my piece with that. The reason being is if I have too much paint in my brush, it's going to be too juicy, and it's not going to make a nice, clean outline of the shape I'm seeking. So I'm going to go to my paper towel, And I want to rub it until it's just barely got paint in it. So stenciling's been around for a long time, like really long. So I don't know how many years, but it was an inexpensive way for people to decorate, and so they did. When I put my stencil on, I have two choices. I can go in a circle like I'm doing now, or I can pounce. Now, if you prefer one way or the other, that's just fine. I don't really mind either way. But the trick really is to not have too much paint in your brush. So when you lift it up, you've got this nice outline. I'm going to try and zoom in a little here and show you how nice and crisp and clean that is. So I'm going to just, remember, I'm not really thinking about where I'm putting things. I'm just kind of randomly placing. I don't care if they are straight or crooked or any of that. Okay, so I'm going to put on that one. Notice I have not reloaded my brush at all. I want to have some going over the edges. And keep in mind, I've got a lot of different colors here that I'm going to be using. So I don't need to necessarily, oops, and it slid a little bit. You know, I'm not going to worry too much about it. Why is it I don't know. I should have taped it down, I guess. But I'm just going to put some little circles. I'm off camera because I zoomed in, so you guys get to see the surprise now. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to leave you out of the fun. So you can see that as I progressed through my snowflakes, that was all one single load of the brush, and it got progressively lighter and lighter and lighter. So I'm going to go back into, not my puddle of paint, but where I blended it and swirled it on my palette. Pick up a little more paint, and I'm going to put on just a little bit more with this vivid blue. This vivid blue is going to be my darkest, deepest tone, so it's going to be in the background. So I'm going to switch and do a couple in this tone with the medium stencil, and I'm just going to randomly select some. I'm going into my puddle for the first time because I swirled my brush after I realized it was pretty dry, and then did the last one, and the last one didn't show very much either. So that means my paint is a little bit dry, and I need to go back into the wet paint. One thing that you could do if you have paint on your brush and it's just kind of running out of steam, if you have a damp spot with just water on your palette, or not on your palette, ooh, don't use your palette, on your paper towel, you can just touch the brush to that little moist area, and it will give it enough moisture to reactivate so that you can finish your artistic stenciling thought and get that down there. So here is what I've done with Vivid Blue. I am not going to wash out my brush. I want it to have different colors in it. So I'm going to just randomly go into another color. I don't want, the only thing I know for sure is I want to save white and winter blue for the very end, because I want those to look like the snowflakes that are closest to me. So I'm going to go into some turquoise, and it's going to look funny. I'm just going to warn you, it's going to look funny, but we're going to do a step at the very end that's going to make all of this seem like it was the master plan, which it was. So remember, I'm not worrying if it's straight or crooked. Snowflakes don't all fall down with, you know, the longest point facing the top. If you have children or grandchildren who are interested in science and things, there is a really interesting story called Snowflake Bentley, and it's about a gentleman who really devoted his life to understanding snowflakes and the crystallization and stuff that occurs. And he was a photographer. There are books still with his photographs in them, but the most remarkable thing is he was around the turn of the century, so the camera he used was one of those box cameras where they have the cloth over their head, and it has to be, you know, very, that, which is amazing to think that he photographed snowflakes that are still being used with that type of technology. The poor guy, he lived like a pauper and really wasn't recognized for his contributions until after he was deceased. So I'm going to go into Provence Sky. And the only thing I'm really wanting, especially as I get lighter and lighter in color, is I don't want to have too many that are the same shape next to each other. I want it to be mixed up a little bit. So I try and look and see, you know, is there one just like it somewhere? If you have my previous stencil, that would work out just great as well. It's got large and small, and in fact larger than these large and smaller than these smalls. So you can also use that. You can use them in combination. However you want to do it is perfect. This is just kind of a fun process. I'm looking here. I think I'm going to go with that one. And if it is something that you have next door to one another, it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. So to prep the board, I told you that I used the sealer and periwinkle. And there isn't kind of a step that I use. I really, really like to paint on something that's very, very smooth, I guess. And so I will paint 50-50 sand lightly and then put on a coat of straight paint. And that seems to give me the nicest coverage and the smoothest surface to work on. So you can see that as I went with my Provence Sky, there's a lot of different tones of Provence Sky in here because I used a brush that had turquoise in it. So that's naturally going to come through. I picked up a little more Provence Sky, and I'm going to put this next to a different one so you can see. Hopefully there's a difference and I'm not just yammering on. But I'm putting Provence Sky on here and just swirling. And you can see that it gets more and more lightened as it goes. So really, if you're using multiple you know, these multiple colors, when you go from one color to the next, not rinsing your brush, you're going to come up with another tone that's completely separate and different. So again, I want to be off the edge, and I don't want it to be lined up all matchy-matchy. So I'm going to go over on top of that guy a little bit. And then I'm going to call it done with my Provence Sky. Now, another thing, when you're finished with the treatment and layers that we're going to do here, one thing that you can do, now I'm going into bright blue, one thing that you can do is stencil on the very top after the treatment. You can put on some metallic, maybe some pearl or a glitter paint or something, and that looks really pretty too. So you can do that at the very end. You can do that once you get the treatment done. I just did exactly what I told you not to. Look at that. I got 2 of them, but nobody's going to notice, and I'm not telling. So there. And a lot of these, because I'm not paying attention to where my stuff is going to go, the main element, Some of this stuff won't show, but I want it to, if even a corner of it shows, I want to make sure that it's there and not absent from the whole composition. So there's that. So now that I have several different colors, I've got my bright blue, my turquoise blue, my vivid blue, Provence sky, I'm going to go into winter blue. And that's going to become a whole nother color because I'm using a dirty brush. If you've not used a stencil brush, one of the things that you have to be aware of is if you wash it, you don't want to use it right away because it will the water will seep through no matter how dry you think it is. It always seeps through and it'll go underneath the stencil. So be very careful that either you have several stencil brushes or you let it dry thoroughly, like I'm talking like overnight, to get that color or that water out. You just don't want to risk it. So I don't care what I'm going over the top of. I'm just looking to build deeper color and progress to some lighter tones as I come up through. Now this looks really, you're going to say, oh my goodness, that doesn't look anything like your original. You are so correct. It couldn't be more different, I don't think. But that's because we're going to be using that Vintage Effects or wash of Snow White. You can always add to this when you're done with the whole painting, and you'll be able to see kind of where things are needed. So this isn't done until you say, I'm finished, and you seal it and get it all ready to do whatever it is you're planning on doing with this piece. So don't feel like you have to have this exactly perfect before you move on. You don't. And at some point, you're just going to say, well, I caught myself. There's that one. At some point, you're just going to say, you know, I'm going to call it. I'm done. I don't want to go any further. Okay, I've got one similar to this. I don't remember which size it was. Oh, let's do a big one. When you can't remember, go to another stencil. But I hadn't switched. I was talking too much and I hadn't switched out in a while anyway, so this works out. So there is no plan. That's the main plan. So this is a lot of fun. If you're interested in making stencils, right here on my YouTube channel, there's a video on how I embellish these snowflakes to make a beautiful big snowflake that's got strokes and those kinds of things. I'm going to put one partial up here, and then I'm going to be saying enough of that color. I'm going to tap my brush into some white, Snow White, and off on my paper towel it goes, and I'm going to save the full strength white for over the top. But you can see that's pretty full strength, especially compared to some of those other colors. I don't always use a stencil brush. I often will use a sponge, but when I'm doing a big surface like this, it saves time, but if you have any issues with your hands, it's also helpful. I have a trigger finger, and when I'm using a sponge, it tends to irritate and wear out my hand faster. I just want to make sure I don't forget about these edges, and just have a little bit of, you know, make sure when you're looking at it, you want to make sure that you've got lights and darks and different colors. And I'm thinking that I'm pretty close to where I want to be. So The other thing that you're going to want to